Hi, this is a quick video to talk about a few questions that I've gotten in regards to the lab reports. And I'll be talking generally about what I'm expecting in the lab report, and then also giving you an example of how to calculate relative uncertainty easily, quickly, using Excel or your alternative spreadsheet program. So first things I'm looking at here are what I mentioned in class, that all the information that you need to complete this lab report can be found in the rubric and the lab handout. So let's start with the lab handout. One thing to know is that the lab report should really only focus on Lab 1B, not on Lab 1A. Lab 1A is kind of the precursor to Lab 1B. It's getting you ready to complete the application lab, the B lab, and that's how labs will generally be proceeding in each of the 2-week labs. So if we scroll down to where Lab 1B starts, under the background information, you'll see about how to calculate uncertainty. So there's that right up there. Definitely read that through to get that background. And then the other thing I just wanted to point out is the post-discussion questions. These questions here basically outline everything that should be in your discussion. And I'm going to talk about two main things that you should have. And the first is what's listed here in number 1, that you should have the graph of all 4 colas on one graph with mass as a function of volume. And you can see the other YouTube videos about how to get that. And then the last point there, to calculate the uncertainty associated with each individual density calculation. So I'll show you how to do that specifically. The other questions are things that you can kind of answer in words in the writing of the results and discussion questions. Looking at the rubric real quick, this is basically a checklist of questions that you should go through to see that you've done everything that I've asked for. And one point here under results are all the necessary tables and figures present. Basically, I think that you can have all the necessary data and figures in one table and one figure. The one figure would be the graph, and the one table would basically contain each and every one of your measurements. So I'll show you kind of what that would look like. So this is maybe what some of your data looks like. You've got a volume, you've got a mass, and maybe this is just perhaps for one soda. Let's say it's the Diet Pepsi. You would want to have your actual numbers for all 4 sodas, but I'll just show you how this might work with just one soda. So you've got this list of volumes, you've got this list of masses, and we talked about in the last video, I talked about how to show significant figures in Excel, so these aren't exactly showing the correct significant figures probably. I've also got listed here the absolute volume uncertainties and absolute mass uncertainties. And if you were using, say, a graduated cylinder, your absolute volume uncertainty might be the same for each measurement. And this might not necessarily be your absolute volume uncertainty, but it's probably the same for each measurement. That might be different if you were using, say, volumetric flasks. The absolute mass uncertainty is based on the balance, and so that's also something. You should have these numbers recorded in your lab notebook. Maybe you recorded them even during Lab 1A, so you can look in your lab notebook for that information. Now, relative uncertainty. Relative uncertainty, remember, is just basically the ratio of the absolute uncertainty to your measurement. And the way that works is that, if you have a bigger measurement, it's kind of okay to have a little bit more uncertainty. A bigger measurement makes the relative uncertainty lower. And the formula for that is simply the absolute uncertainty divided by the measurement. So for volume, let's make a formula that will calculate that for us. We're going to type an equal sign, and then take that absolute volume uncertainty, type a divided by sign, that /, and then the actual volume measurement. And that gives us the relative volume uncertainty. It's not going to automatically be listed as a % there, but you can change that by going to Format Cells. And under this number menu, you can choose %. Usually the default is general, so it changes it. By changing it to a %, you change it from 0.02 to 2%. Relative mass uncertainty, same thing, equal sign, the absolute mass uncertainty divided by the actual mass. Now I'll stop there for a minute, and I've shown a number of you how to do this, but to rather than retyping that formula in each cell, what I can do is copy down those formulas, and I can do that by dragging down that little blue square that's right there. So you have to get your cursor right on that little blue square, it doesn't work. So what I said earlier, the bigger our measurements, these volumes go from smallest to biggest, the lower our relative uncertainties. So in general, the more you're measuring, the lower your uncertainty. So that's kind of always a good goal. Now, how do you figure out the uncertainty on the density itself? It's obviously going to be some combination of the relative volume uncertainty and the relative mass uncertainty, because both those numbers go into density. So I just copied and pasted the excerpt from the lab handout that gives an example of calculating the relative density uncertainty. And essentially, once we have the volume relative uncertainty and the mass relative uncertainty, we simply take the square root of the sum of the squares of those two numbers. So it's the square root of the volume relative uncertainty squared plus the mass relative uncertainty squared. So the only thing that's tricky about doing that in Excel is knowing the right code words for saying to do, or telling your Excel spreadsheet to do a square root. In Excel, the function for that is SQRT. So if you type equals SQRT, it'll take the square root of whatever you put inside these parentheses. So now I can just say, okay, take the square root of my relative volume uncertainty squared, and to say squared, I do the caret, shift 6, 2, so that does squared, plus my relative mass uncertainty squared. And then I close parentheses and hit enter. And again, I can just copy that down. So again, my relative density uncertainty should be smaller with my bigger measurements. And that's why it's kind of always a good idea to measure as much as you can. So that really quickly and easily gave me a relative density uncertainty for each and every one of my measurements. I don't have my trend lines and I don't have all my series on here, but you can basically repeat this process for each of your series and each of your and have eventually have all of your series on your graph. Last thing I wanted to show you was how to copy and paste this easily into Excel, or sorry, into your actual lab report. So if I have a Word document open, that's just my lab handout, it's really easy to create a table from Excel, because all I have to do is copy whichever cells I want to include and paste them in Excel. And you can you might need to reformat it. It sort of, it changes you might need to change the fonts a little bit or the sizes. It might not look quite as pretty as it did in Excel. But basically that's all there is to it. So if you want the grid lines on this, I actually usually do that in Excel and then copy and paste it over. So if I make that bigger, I can see my grid lines here. That gives you your grid lines, and then you can copy and paste it into Excel and reformat, copy and paste it into Word and reformat if necessary. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful in learning how to calculate those relative uncertainties without too much time and put that into your lab report.